The day my 2-year-old son died in his hospital bed, I jumped off a high-rise building. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to being 18. In this life, Noah Scott gave up taking the college entrance exam just to see me one last time before I left to study abroad. In my past life, I had given up studying abroad for him, eloped with him, and had a child out of wedlock. But before we could get married, Noah regretted it. He regretted choosing me over his future. This time, facing Noah Scott, who had rushed to the airport to see me, I resolutely abandoned him and boarded the plane. When I returned years later, he was the CEO of a billion-dollar company, holding the hand of our former high school queen. He even sent me an invitation to his wedding. Seeing me arrive with a prominent baby bump, he scoffed, mocking me for having a child out of wedlock. But I didn't care at all. I raised my hand, revealing my wedding ring, gently stroking my belly. Thank you. This time, I had my child within marriage. And it was already my second. The airport was bustling with people coming and going. Noah was drenched in sweat, gripping my wrist tightly, refusing to let go. His hands were firm, holding on to me with all his strength. Seeing his face, I felt a little dazed. 18-year-old Noah Scott, still as reckless as ever. I was about to go abroad to study, and he had given up the college entrance exam just to stop me at the airport. Stay, Emily, just for me, he pleaded, his eyes locked onto mine, his grip tightening. Just as he was about to pull me into an embrace, a sharp voice rang out from behind. Isn't today the college entrance exam? Are you crazy, pestering my daughter like this? My mother's voice was stern. My father stood beside her, his face dark as he strode over to pull me away from Noah. Emily, let's go. My father's voice was firm. Please. Noah's eyes were red, his voice choked with emotion. In his eyes, there was nothing but me. But before my father could act, I slapped Noah across the face. Before he could react, I shoved him away with all my strength. Everything I had been holding in my hands spilled over his head. Water dripped down from his hair, soaking him completely. He stood there, frozen in shock. He had given up his exam just to see me, but all he got in return was a slap across the face. When he finally looked up again, I was already standing beside my parents, pulling away from him. Get lost. I saw the hurt on his face, but I felt no pity. Pointing at the airport entrance, I smiled coldly. Why should I give up studying abroad? Do you think a toad can dream of eating swan meat? What gives you the right to make me stay? You're not worthy, Noah Scott. You disgust me. His body trembled slightly, his red-rimmed eyes staring at me in disbelief. Is it because of your parents? He asked hoarsely. I shook my head, raising my wrist to show him my bracelet, a gift from my mother last year, worth $20,000. My phone alone costs more than your entire year's living expenses. Your parents would have to work 3 jobs to afford it. I smiled even wider. Let me put it plainly, Noah Scott. I don't want to live a hard life. So get lost. This time, as I stepped forward, Noah didn't stop me. My parents exchanged glances. My father chuckled. Just kids fooling around, no need to take it seriously. He looked at Noah. Young man, you should leave. But Noah refused to believe it. He couldn't believe that the girlfriend who had cried over the phone with him just yesterday was now cutting him off so ruthlessly. He tried to step closer again, but I had had enough. I called airport security. In front of me, Noah Scott was forcibly taken away. Just as he was being dragged off, I glanced at him indifferently. Then, with a smirk, I said, He looks like a stalker. I've seen plenty of guys like him. Can you hand him over to the police? Maybe keep him locked up a little longer? He would never make it to his exam again. His eyes widened. He held his breath, unable to say a word. The light in his eyes dimmed instantly. Under Noah Scott's gaze, filled with disappointment, I boarded the plane without hesitation. Bookmark. The moment we took off, I let out a breath of relief. From now on, we were nothing more than strangers. 9 years had passed by the time I returned home. When I received the wedding invitation Noah had sent through someone else, I was a little surprised. Seeing the hotel address printed on the card, I frowned. If I wasn't mistaken, this hotel wasn't cheap, certainly not something Noah from my past life could have afforded. For a brief moment, curiosity flickered in me. I gently stroked my pregnant belly and turned to the man behind me. I want to go take a look. After getting his approval, I sent a message to my parents. Mom, we'll be returning home in a few days, our whole family of 4. The wedding day arrived as scheduled, and the venue was filled with distinguished guests. I didn't take the time to admire the extravagant setup. Instead, I carefully protected my stomach, making sure to move cautiously. Noah Scott stood in a prominent spot, his tailored designer suit highlighting his refined presence. He was all smiles, greeting the guests warmly. He hadn't noticed me. Compared to 9 years ago, he looked even more confident and successful. I walked slowly, and as I did, more and more people passed by me. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Before long, a large crowd had gathered around him. "Wow, Noah, our old classmate is now a real big shot," someone teased with a laugh. "You've truly become a success, CEO of a major company, marrying a rich and beautiful wife. Looks like that dream actually came true." With a net worth in the hundreds of millions, I bet even the ground shakes when he walks. Another guest chimed in. "Everyone's been talking about your company lately. You're so young, but you've already made such a name for yourself in business. It's really something to be jealous of." Surrounded by the crowd, Noah still hadn't noticed me. Then, someone spoke up, calling for everyone to make way. "Come on, everyone, give some space. Today's star is our groom. Let's let the bride shine too." The wedding ceremony had already ended, and in the midst of cheers, the bride stepped forward, now dressed in her formal reception gown. A sparkling wedding ring adorned her finger. Lena Harper walked up to Noah's side, and the two exchanged a smile. He gently took her hand, protectively pulling her into his embrace. "You must be exhausted after the ceremony," he said softly. "I told you to rest for a bit before coming out." Someone in the crowd teased. Look at Noah being so considerate. He couldn't wait to get married the moment she said yes to his proposal. Another person joined in the laughter. "Less than a month between the proposal and the wedding. This was all part of your plan, wasn't it? You had it all figured out. This wedding was clearly prepared long in advance." Someone else added, "Even the wedding dress is custom made. It must have taken at least a year. It's a masterpiece from a top designer." The atmosphere was filled with joy and laughter. But then, someone unexpectedly mentioned my name. Good thing Noah didn't end up with Emily back then. A man as devoted as him, someone as heartless and cold as her, never deserved him. That one sentence stirred up a wave of murmured conversations. A few guests chuckled before someone else spoke up. "Hey, since all of us old classmates are here, did Noah invite Emily too? Let her see what she lost out on?" Lena, nestled in Noah's embrace, let out a soft laugh and waved her hand dismissively. "Don't tease him. She wouldn't dare come anyway." Another guest chuckled. "Yeah, don't be mean. After all, we were all classmates. Let's give her some dignity." Everyone immediately started praising Lena's kindness, saying she was so considerate, even toward someone like me. Someone like me? I thought about it for a moment. 9 years ago, my boyfriend gave up his college entrance exam to rush to the airport and see me off, only to watch my back as I walked away without hesitation. He knelt outside my family's mansion for an entire day and night, refusing to leave even in the pouring rain. But even then, I never looked back. Instead, I heartlessly ridiculed him, coldly breaking up with him without any remorse. And in the moment when he was at his lowest, when I was abroad, I called him. I sent a driver to bring him $300,000 and told him to leave. "Noah Scott, this $300,000 should be enough to buy back the future you lost by skipping your college entrance exam. Take the money and go. You don't deserve to be with me." As I recalled that moment, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small snack that had been prepared for me before I left home. I popped one into my mouth, blinked, and thought to myself, so what? Noah Scott never deserved to be with me. He never did. I had already made the wrong choice once. In my past life, when he chased me to the airport, I hesitated. I caved in. I let his threats of dying without me convince me to stay. I gave up studying abroad. Against my parents' objections, I eloped with him. "Emily, trust me. I will take care of you." Of course, I trusted him. From the moment I decided to follow him, I had given him my unwavering faith. But reality had other plans. No matter how hard it was, no degree, no skills, struggling in poverty, sacrificing dreams for survival, I never once backed down. But Noah Scott couldn't do the same. By the 6th year of our relationship, when we had finally built a home of our own after years of hardship, he told me he regretted it. Looking at my swollen belly, he reassured me that he wouldn't abandon me. He wouldn't leave. But he also didn't love me anymore. Even after our son was born, he never once mentioned marriage. I bore the weight of being an unwed mother, enduring the judgment of others. I became the disgrace of my family. My father fell ill from rage, suffered a stroke, and passed away in the hospital. That same day, the Shen Corporation collapsed. That was the day Scott spoke his first words to me in days. "Emily, your family is bankrupt." I couldn't make out the expression on his face. It wasn't until later that I realized he had been happy. Deep down, he had always resented me. He had hated my family. Over time, that resentment only grew, festering like a wound that would one day burst open. He blamed my parents for insisting on sending me abroad. If they hadn't, he wouldn't have thrown away his future just to chase me down. Wouldn't have lost everything because of me. He regretted it. The day I realized this, we were standing on opposite sides of the street. I was holding my son's tiny hand. He was standing across from me, with Lena Harper's father by his side. My son was the first to notice him. The moment I saw Noah, my breath caught in my throat. My instinct was to step back, to move away. But right before my eyes, Noah Scott lifted his hand and beckoned my son forward. Like a kite whose string had suddenly snapped, my child let go of my hand and ran toward the road. Bang! The sharp screech of brakes and the violent crash froze me in place. It wasn't until I saw my son lying lifeless in a hospital bed that I truly saw Noah Scott's face. His expression was filled with nothing but disgust. I was wrong. I regretted everything. Standing on the rooftop that day about to jump, I made a wish. In my next life, I will never choose him again. And now, my wish had come true. A gentle kick came from my belly, grounding me back in the present. I lowered my head, preparing to slip away unnoticed. But before I could move, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Wait, who said Emily didn't come to the wedding? Isn't that her?" At that moment, I lifted my head and found myself locking eyes with countless guests. I stood there, wearing a simple maternity dress, my hair pulled into a plain braid. My entire outfit was modest, practical. Compared to Lena Harper, who was standing in the center of it all, I looked utterly out of place. The pearl on her custom-made gown alone was probably worth more than my entire outfit from head to toe. I had never cared about things like this, because I had everything I needed. But there were always people who cared. Oh my God, it's been years since we last saw her. "Emily, what kind of life were you living abroad? I thought you'd be draped in gold and diamonds, but you came back looking like this? Showing up to a wedding dressed like that, it's kind of disrespectful, don't you think?" She's Noah Scott's ex, after all. This is just embarrassing. The whispers grew louder, the stares became sharper. Some people smirked at me, others openly looked me up and down, their gazes flickering between me and Lena Harper. And then, I had been discovered. There was no need for me to slip away unnoticed anymore. Straightening my back, I walked toward the newlyweds and handed them the red envelope I had prepared. "It's been a long time. Congratulations on your wedding." Noah Scott didn't take the envelope. His gaze lowered, hiding whatever emotion flickered in his eyes. After a few seconds of silence, his expression turned cold, and he finally muttered, "Thank you." Lena Harper frowned at me, her eyes drifting down to my stomach, before she suddenly let out a laugh. "You've been gone for years, and now you show up with a big belly? I don't remember hearing about any wedding. You're not trying to pull a gene invasion stunt, are you?" At her words, Noah's head snapped toward my stomach, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "You're pregnant?" Meeting his gaze, I nodded calmly, a soft smile on my lips. 6 months. A few guests exchanged knowing looks as if they had just put something together. Noah's lips curled slightly, but his voice carried a hint of pity. "I never thought your life would turn out like this." As if suddenly remembering something, Lena, still tucked in his arms, sneered at me with open arrogance. She rolled her eyes and smirked. "Oh, Emily, you probably don't know yet, do you? That 30 grand you tossed at him like he was some beggar? That's what helped Noah get to where he is today. If it weren't for your generous charity, he wouldn't be standing here as a success." She let out a laugh, feigning gratitude. "In a way, I should be thanking you." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Amidst the amusement, Lena lifted her chin, her gaze once again falling to my stomach. Oh dear, you came alone? No sign of the baby's father? Unwed and pregnant? Is he not taking responsibility? Life must be tough for you. She let out a dramatic sigh. Women always end up suffering in the end. With just a few words, she had painted me as a pitiful woman abandoned by the father of my child. The laughter around me grew louder, people grinning and whispering among themselves. Then someone from the crowd called out, egging them on. Noah, Lena, why are you just standing there? Shouldn't you show some kindness and help a poor pregnant woman out? More voices joined in. Yeah, imagine the gossip. Noah Scott's ex-girlfriend struggling like this. What a disgrace. Noah remained silent, but Lena chuckled, nodding as if considering it seriously. That's true, but you see, I've always had a soft spot for charity. Her voice dripped with mockery as she covered her mouth, laughing. The whispers around me turned into murmurs of fake sympathy. Then Lena, as if suddenly struck by an idea, tilted her head thoughtfully. Oh, right. There's a job opening at one of our branch offices. It's a bit demanding, but hey, at least it's a corporate position. Considering your situation, I'm sure you'd be grateful for the opportunity. You don't have a job or an income right now, do you? She wasn't wrong. I didn't have a job or an income. But I wasn't lacking anything either. Sidestepping the two of them, I moved away, trying to escape the overwhelming scent of Lena's perfume. But my action, me deliberately avoiding them, was seen differently in Noah's eyes. To him, it was a sign of weakness. It was an escape. Without warning, he grabbed my wrist, ignoring Lena's jealous glare. His face darkened. I'll arrange a position for you in my company. It's at least better than whatever Shen Corporation has left now. With a quick twist, I yanked myself free. The moment I did, I instinctively placed a hand over my belly and took a step back. That won't be necessary. You're overthinking things. Noah stared at his now empty hand, his expression growing even darker. Emily, sometimes caring too much about saving face will only make you suffer more. Lena's face stiffened, her smile faltering for a moment. Then she gritted her teeth and tugged on Noah's sleeve. Honey, maybe she just thinks the money's not enough. Why don't you just write her a check? Consider it a donation. The second those words left her mouth, some self-righteous old classmates immediately jumped in, eager to stir the pot further. How much did Emily give Noah back then? How about he pays you back exactly what you gave him? Not a penny more. What do you think? Are you regretting things now? Look at yourself, compared to Mrs. Scott. It's like a swan next to a crow. You're worlds apart. And that baby in your belly? I bet you don't even know who the father is. Huh? Laughter erupted around me. They were mocking me, ridiculing the life they assumed I was living. Noah Scott's grip on his wine glass tightened. His gaze darkened as he looked at me, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. I thought you turned me down back then so you could live a better life, he said coldly. But I never expected you'd let yourself fall this low. His eyes swept over me once before he pulled his wife closer, creating an unmistakable distance between us. A divide that could never be crossed again. I never expected Noah Scott to still be this self-righteous after all these years. Lena Harper shot me a warning glance, unwilling to let her husband be distracted by another woman. Then, as if she had finally realized something, her smile widened, and the disgust in her eyes deepened. Let's take a guess. Who's the father of the baby? She mused playfully. That single sentence instantly shifted the entire conversation. I bet he's a foreigner. Someone speculated. She's been abroad all this time after all. Who knows what she's been up to? He's probably dirt poor. No way he could compare to our CEO Scott. That's why she's too ashamed to bring him here. Or worse, maybe the guy didn't even want to take responsibility and ran off. That's why she came back home. No marriage announcement? Must have been an accident. A surprise pregnancy. Tsk, tsk. I bet I'm right. The rumors grew wilder and more vicious. Noah's brows furrowed deeply, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he spoke up. That's enough. There's no need to humiliate a pregnant woman at my wedding. I raised an eyebrow and glanced at him. I hadn't expected him to be the first one to grow tired of the spectacle. Lena looked like she wanted to say something else, but before she could, a well-dressed man in a suit approached her and Noah, whispering something in their ears. I was standing close enough to catch what he said. Sir, the guest you invited, Mr. Yan, just confirmed his arrival. He'll be here in about 10 minutes with his family. At those words, Noah immediately straightened, his expression turning serious. He lifted a hand, signaling the guests to settle down, and then took his wife's hand before making an announcement. Everyone, we have an important guest arriving soon. Please enjoy yourselves in the meantime. Curiosity flickered across the guests' faces, and someone discreetly signaled to Lena, asking who the guest was. With a beaming smile, she looked at the crowd, and with clear pride in her voice announced, "It's Mr. Yan, the one you always see featured in business magazines. He flew in from abroad just to attend our wedding. He's my husband's future business partner." Gasps of admiration rippled through the guests, their envious gazes locked onto Noah and Lena. Some people seemed unfamiliar with the name until their companions whispered hints or pulled out their phones to look him up. "This is straight out of a billionaire romance novel," someone exclaimed. "He's mixed race, right? A top-tier tycoon. I heard his wealth is practically unmatched." "Yan Shuhong is truly a diamond bachelor. Too bad he got married right when he hit the perfect age. And he already has a second child. His wife must be so lucky. I wish I could trade places with her for a day." Rich men who love their wives always succeed, just like Noah Scott. Just like that, everyone had forgotten about me. The entire conversation revolved around Mr. Yan. Then, a little boy with striking mixed-race features appeared at the wedding entrance, flanked by bodyguards. The child, around 3 or 4 years old, had chubby cheeks and an adorably serious expression as he carefully held up the hem of his formal outfit. Lena immediately stepped forward, her face lighting up with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Oh my, what an adorable child. Come here, let me see you." She reached out to touch him, but the boy swiftly avoided her hand. Her smile froze awkwardly. Before she could react, the little boy suddenly launched himself forward, straight at me. The moment he reached me, he hesitated for a second, then wrapped his soft little arms around me. "Mommy," he said, his voice sweet and clear. "You didn't wait for me." I looked down at the fluffy little head nestled against me. Behind him, a tall figure approached. A large, warm hand landed on my shoulder, effortlessly pulling me into his embrace. The guest that Noah Scott had been eagerly anticipating, the prestigious Mr. Yan, now stood behind me. Facing the stunned and speechless crowd, I smiled and slowly raised my left hand, proudly displaying the wedding ring I had worn for years. "Ah, I forgot to introduce myself," I said lightly. "I got married early, and this child, he was born within marriage. This is already our second child." For a brief moment, an awkward silence fell over the room. In the midst of the commotion, someone accidentally knocked over a wine glass. The crisp sound of shattering glass jolted everyone back to reality. Their gazes shifted between me, Ethan Yan, and my obviously pregnant belly. Only Noah Scott and Lena Harper couldn't hide their shock. Almost at the same time, they blurted out, "Mr. Yan? That can't be true? Are you making this up?" Before they could finish their sentence, Ethan calmly draped his coat over my shoulders and whispered something softly to me. His voice was filled with unmistakable tenderness, making Noah and Lena's faces twist as if they had just swallowed something bitter. For a moment, no one spoke. After a few beats of silence, someone forced out an awkward chuckle, trying to smooth over the situation. The hostility from earlier had completely vanished. "Congratulations. I mean, we're all old friends, right? How come you never told us you got married? Something this big, and we're only finding out now? Yeah, you even let Noah and Lena go out of their way to help you find a job. You could have said something earlier. This is a little embarrassing, don't you think?" The shift in attitude was laughable. Just moments ago, they had been mocking me, speculating about my supposed miserable life. But the moment Ethan Yan appeared, they all shut their mouths. The contempt on their faces had transformed into envy and resentment. "You should have mentioned it sooner," someone else chimed in. "Emily always had good taste. If she was going to pick a man, of course, it would be the best." "Who said she's been living a terrible life? I bet most of us couldn't even dream of the way she's living now. Look at her hands, no calluses at all. And her face hasn't changed a bit since college. Must be nice to be a rich wife." As they continued to gossip, some people approached me with friendly smiles, trying to strike up a conversation. One even held out their phone, displaying a QR code. "Hey, let's exchange contacts." I couldn't help but laugh. tightening my grip on Ethan's hand. No need. I looked at them, amused. Did you forget? It's not that I didn't want to tell you. Back then, you all kicked me out of the group chat. I had no way of reaching any of you. Our wedding was held abroad years ago. It's normal that you wouldn't know. My polite yet distant response left them visibly uncomfortable. Back when I left the country and broke things off with Noah, these same people had called me heartless, saying I didn't deserve him. They had hurled every insult imaginable at me. Even Lena had stepped in to defend him back then. Are you really giving up on him just because of a difference in family background? How shallow can you be? Then they had sent a video of Noah kneeling in the rain outside my family's mansion, looking small and pitiful against the grand gates. And right after that, they all blocked me. Kicked me out. I lowered my gaze, picking up a small piece of cake from the table and taking a bite. It tasted too sweet, too cloying. Ethan noticed right away and handed me a glass of water. I took a sip, then lightly tugged at his sleeve. There are too many people here. Let's go for a walk. Holding our son's tiny hand, I turned and made my way toward the exit. Seeing that I was about to leave, someone couldn't sit still any longer. Emily? It was Noah's voice that called my name, but when I turned around, the person speaking was Lena. Her face was tense, her expression stiff. She forced a smile, raising her glass, but I could see the way her other hand was clenched around the fabric of her dress. Emily, you're being rude, she said with fake politeness. At least have a toast with us. Let's drink to your reunion with Mr. Yan. Ethan's hand on my shoulder twitched slightly, silently telling me not to respond. He lifted his head, his sharp gaze landing on Lena. Then, after a brief pause, he let out a soft chuckle. You can have my secretary drink with you instead, he said. My wife doesn't like it when I drink. His deep, fluent Chinese, paired with his strikingly sharp, chiseled features, made the words even more impactful. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Lena's grip tighten even further. She was practically tearing through her dress at this point. Noah took a step forward, as if he wanted to say something to Ethan. But when his eyes landed on me, the words got stuck in his throat. After a long silence, he finally took a deep breath and asked, "So you were hiding this from me on purpose?" His voice was laced with frustration. You broke up with me because of him, didn't you? His gaze darted to Ethan's hand, resting protectively on my back. This was your better choice all along? His back straightened as his eyes fell to our wedding rings, his expression turning mocking. You're still the same as ever, he sneered. You never change. Noah Scott raised his glass in a silent toast before tilting his head back and downing the drink in one gulp. Then, setting the glass aside, he spoke, his voice steady, but laced with bitterness. Mr. Yan, let me give you a piece of advice. This woman's heart is colder than stone. No matter how much warmth you try to give her, it'll never be enough. 9 years had passed since I left for abroad. When Noah had rushed to the airport back then, throwing away everything for me, he probably never imagined that I would reject him so decisively. Back then, I also believed that he was the only person I could ever love. But the heat of impulsive emotions always fades. Eventually, reality sets in. And with it, regret. Was giving up his college entrance exam for me really worth it? While I stayed with him in a damp basement, unable to afford prenatal care, but still giving birth to our son during the hardest period of our lives, while he watched his old friends climb the social ladder as he remained stagnant, struggling just to make ends meet, was it surprising that he regretted it? He used to say, "Once I have money, we'll get married." But even after he got his first car, his first apartment, even when our son turned 2, he never proposed. "Noah," I said calmly, looking at him, "if I hadn't gone to the airport that day, do you think things would have been different?" Memories of us were like dusty old books. If you touched them, all you got was a handful of grime. I waited for him to finish speaking, watching him quietly. When he finally fell silent, I leaned into Ethan Yan's arms and looked at Noah and Lena. "How can you take the words of an 18-year-old so seriously?" I said with a soft chuckle. "If you had truly been unable to let go of the past, you wouldn't be standing here today, successful and wealthy. At the very least, you wouldn't be feeling regret right now." With that, I smiled and added, "By the way, I love my husband and children very much. but thanks for your concern." Giving him a polite nod, I turned to Ethan, smiling as I met his gaze. Though my expression remained calm, my ears flushed slightly. Ethan guided me away from the crowd, but even after we left, I caught the faint curve of a smile at the corner of his lips. I had never told Ethan about my past with Noah, because I had truly let it go. There was no need to dwell on people and things that no longer mattered. The only thing worth cherishing was the present. But Noah Scott didn't think the same way. The things he couldn't have would always be the ones he obsessed over the most. To him, I was nothing more than a woman who had abandoned him for money. In his mind, he probably still hated me. As my family and I got into the car, Noah stood at the top of the steps, watching from above. His face darkened as he saw me being carefully helped into the luxury vehicle. Then, his voice rang out, heavy with resentment. "Emily, you're such a hypocrite. Do you even deserve happiness?" I paused, turning slightly in confusion. He stepped forward, his eyes cold as he let out a mocking laugh. "You threw 30 grand at me, like I was trash. Then you went online and ridiculed me for being a toad dreaming of a swan." His fists clenched as his voice grew more heated. "While you were out there living a life of luxury, have you ever thought about me? Did you ever wonder what happened to the man you forced into picking food out of the garbage to survive?" He let out a shaky breath. "I hate you. You're fake and heartless. One day everyone will see you for who you really are." I turned fully to face him, watching the storm of emotions on his face. To me, he just seemed irrational. Ethan tugged at my dress, sleepy and impatient to go home. He held onto my skirt, gently pulling me toward the car. I didn't bother explaining myself to Noah. I didn't mention the degrees I earned while abroad. I didn't talk about the certifications I obtained. I simply looked at him for a moment and then said, "Noah, before I even left the country, I had already deactivated all my accounts and contacts. Whoever you saw online, that wasn't me." As the car door closed, I saw his face twist into an expression of disbelief and frustration. Lena, on the other hand, had taken a step back. Her gaze flickered briefly toward me before she quickly looked away. Whatever they thought, it was none of my concern. Ethan reached over and carefully buckled my seatbelt, his breath warm against my ear as he chuckled softly. "Hiding something like this from me? Aren't you afraid I'd get jealous?" I turned to meet his piercing blue eyes and smiled. "Are you jealous?" Ethan slid into the driver's seat, tapping his fingers lightly on the steering wheel. "A little," he admitted. "I was considering whether I should accept Noah Scott's business proposal." He mused casually. "But since he's my wife's ex, maybe I should rethink it." I nearly choked on my water. Giving him a playful shove, I shot him an amused look. "Are you really going to turn down a business deal over something like that?" I asked, curious. As the hotel grew smaller in the distance, disappearing behind us, Ethan thought for a moment before shaking his head. "No," he said. "I noticed some shortcuts in their operations. Nothing obvious, but small flaws here and there." Then he smirked slightly. "You know what's even more interesting?" As the car turned onto the road leading to the Shen family estate, he continued, "All of the problem areas are connected to Lena Harper's relatives." His voice was casual, but there was a sharpness beneath his words. "Instead of wasting time working with them, I'd rather take a look at your father's company." Outside the window, the familiar outline of my childhood home came into view. In the back seat, our little one clutched his toy tightly, already dozing off with soft, steady breaths. Ethan parked the Bentley smoothly in front of the house. Tonight, we were home. As soon as my parents opened the door, they took the little one, who was still fast asleep, from Ethan's arms. "Hurry up and wash your hands," my mother said warmly. "There were a lot of people at the wedding, right?" "Emily, I know how you are. Too many people, and you lose your appetite. Wash up and have some soup. I've been simmering it for hours." She kissed her grandson's soft cheek before looking up at me with a bright smile. Seeing her like this, warmth surged through my heart. In this life, my mother's hair had yet to show signs of gray. My father, thanks to my insistence on regular checkups, was still in good health. There was something I never told Noah Scott or anyone else. Every so often, Ethan would quietly bring me and the kids back home to visit. I had always been able to see my parents. The Shen family had never gone bankrupt. At least for now, I knew with certainty. I had made the right choice. I was happy. I first met Ethan because of our parents. The two families had known each other for years. That year, when he was sent to pick me up from the airport, he was only 20. Standing at 6'3", he towered over me. After introducing myself in English, I watched as he bent down, picked up my suitcase with ease, and placed it into the trunk. His gaze landed on me, and in flawless Chinese, he said, "So small." I wasn't sure if he meant my height, barely 5'3", or my age. Hearing such fluent Chinese in a foreign land caught me off guard. I instinctively looked up. That day, the weather was beautiful. Bathed in the warm sunlight, I met his piercing blue eyes for the first time. By my third year abroad, Ethan confessed his feelings for me. The Yan family's businesses were all overseas, and despite his hectic schedule, he always found time to take me out after work. It was simple. It was natural. By our 4th year together, we had met each other's parents. At first, we planned to get engaged and wait until after I graduated to have the wedding. But then, a year before my graduation, I found out I was pregnant. Then, we'll have to hurry and get married. Holding a bouquet of roses, he knelt before me on one knee. With our friends as witnesses, he smiled brightly, his happiness unmistakable. During that time, Ethan was busier than ever. He had to take care of me while juggling work. Sometimes, in the middle of a meeting, he would reach into his bag and accidentally pull out baby items instead of documents. Pacifiers, tiny socks, a burp cloth, things he had bought and forgotten to take out. Without missing a beat, he'd put them aside and continue his meeting, unfazed. His colleagues would smile knowingly. When our son was born, he got even busier. "Don't worry," he told me, gently rocking the baby in his arms. "I'll take care of things at home. Focus on your exams." Looking at him then, the perfect doting father, I couldn't help but recall Noah Scott from my past life. Even after our son learned to walk, Noah never learned how to change a diaper. It wasn't that he couldn't. He just never wanted to. Love and indifference, there was always a clear distinction. One autumn evening, I stood on a foreign street, exhaling into the crisp air. Leaves crunched softly beneath my boots as I looked up at the window of our home. Inside, through the glass, I could see Ethan holding our son in his arms. Noticing me, they both waved enthusiastically. I smiled. I had no plans to have a second child. But after graduating with honors and earning my certifications, I unexpectedly started feeling nauseous at work. Our son was well taken care of by his nanny, and Ethan was away on a business trip. When I got the pregnancy confirmation, I sat there for a long time, dazed. "It's okay," Ethan reassured me the moment he found out. He had dropped everything and flown straight home. "If you don't want to keep it, I'll respect your decision." Holding our sleeping son in one arm, he gently kissed the boy's forehead before turning his full attention to me. Sipping warm water, I glanced at the two identical faces in front of me, one big, one small. Eventually, I leaned down and kissed our son. "Congratulations, little one. You're going to be a big brother." Back in the present, Ethan, who rarely showed affection in front of others, was now sitting on the couch, casually holding a bowl of hot soup. He scooped up a spoonful and brought it to my lips. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents secretly watching from the corner of the room. My face heated up. I smacked Ethan's arm lightly and grumbled, "I can drink it myself." "Do you have no shame?" he chuckled, amused. Ethan didn't seem to care about Noah's words. I let my gaze drift past him, looking out at the scenery beyond the window. For the first time in a while, I found myself reminiscing about being 18. It had been autumn when I left for abroad. Thank goodness I got on that plane. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have met Ethan Yan. This time, I hadn't missed my chance. Only a handful of people knew about Ethan's decision not to go through with the partnership with Scott Enterprises. Noah personally reached out to him and, right in front of me, let out a mocking laugh. "So, in the end, you still sided with your wife's family." "I should have known," he sneered. "Of course you wouldn't let an opportunity like this slip into someone else's hands." Then his gaze flickered to me. "Emily, you really found yourself a great husband." Ethan frowned, shielding me slightly behind him. His voice turned cold. "If you want to blame someone, blame yourself," he said bluntly. "Respect goes both ways. Business should be fair." Noah's expression stiffened, but after a few moments, he forced himself to speak. "Forget it. Even without this deal, my company will do just fine." Then, as if remembering something, he chuckled dryly. By the way, I was too busy at the wedding to say this, but I should thank you, Mrs. Yan. His tone was laced with sarcasm. That 30 grand you tossed at me all those years ago? He continued. I made sure to return it properly. I sent you a check for 3 million. Consider it my way of paying you back with interest. Ethan took a step forward, his face darkening, as if ready to settle things with him right then and there. But before he could act, I simply responded in an indifferent tone. No need. Keep it for yourself. Without hesitation, I hung up. Later, I had someone tear up the check. After that call, Noah never contacted us again. We stayed in the country for another 2 weeks before Ethan and I took my parents with us back overseas. Those old acquaintances who had been desperate to reconnect with me sent over updates about Noah and Lena. 3 months after their wedding, Lena had excitedly announced her pregnancy on social media. But strangely, she suddenly disappeared from the public eye soon after. Then, the news broke. Multiple high-ranking executives at Scott Enterprises were caught embezzling funds. Rumors spread that the company was nearing bankruptcy. Not even 4 months after their extravagant wedding, Noah's company was making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Employees started coming forward, exposing his favoritism toward his in-laws. Lena's cousins and uncles had all secured high positions within the company in record time. Some were accused of embezzling public funds. Others were caught accepting bribes. And some, far worse, were exposed for harassing female employees. In just one night, Scott Enterprises was rotting from the inside out. I stared at the man sitting across from me, casually peeling an apple. Ethan noticed my gaze and handed me a slice. Chewing slowly, I frowned at him. You didn't do anything, did you? Without missing a beat, he placed another piece of fruit in my mouth and shrugged. How could you suspect me? His tone was innocent. This is entirely their own doing. I had nothing to do with it. My due date was approaching. Hearing this news didn't bring me joy or sadness. It just felt like I was watching a drama unfold from a distance. A week later, Scott Enterprises officially declared bankruptcy. 3 nights after that, I received a call from an unknown number. At first, there was only silence on the other end. Growing impatient, I was about to hang up when I finally heard a familiar voice. It was hoarse, accompanied by the sound of faint coughing. Emily, Noah murmured. I'm sorry. For the first time, he apologized. He had finally realized that I was never the one who spread rumors about him online. The people who truly mocked him weren't me. It was those so-called friends at his wedding. The same ones who had flattered him in person. The ones who, behind his back, ridiculed him for being a lowly commoner chasing after a rich girl. They had never believed he deserved to be with me, and when I left for abroad, their jealousy and resentment boiled over completely. They had pretended to comfort him while secretly spreading rumors about him online. They had gleefully called him a toad dreaming of a swan. They had laughed at his downfall, saying he deserved to be abandoned. Even the woman he had ultimately chosen, Lena Harper, had only married him for his money and status. And when Scott Enterprises declared bankruptcy the very next day, she filed for divorce. She disappeared from his life without a trace. The once proud CEO, who had stood tall and confident at his wedding, had lost everything overnight. Through the phone, his breathing was heavy, unsteady. Noah Scott kept repeating the same words over and over. I'm sorry. After a few moments of silence, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. Emily, if you had never gotten married while you were abroad, and if I had come looking for you again after building my company, would you have given me another chance? He hesitated before continuing. Back then, I was sure you loved me. I gently stroked my rounded belly, cutting him off before he could say anything more. Noah, you already know the answer, I said calmly. There are no what-ifs. And even if there were, the only person I'd want to meet again would still be Ethan Yan. As for you, I paused. The boy who once stammered through a love letter with a flushed face, the Noah Scott from my past, died the day my child took his last breath in that hospital bed. Neither of us spoke again. Just before I hung up, my son toddled over, holding up a colorful drawing he had just finished. As I traced the crayon lines with my fingers, I absent-mindedly asked Noah, Do you want Ethan to send you another 30 grand? Maybe it'll help you get back on your feet. Silence. Then I realized something. I was the only one who had truly moved on. The person on the other end of the call hadn't. Finally, his hoarse voice came through, quiet and resigned. No need. The line disconnected. And just like that, Noah Scott disappeared from my life completely. A few days later, in the hospital, I gave birth to our daughter. Ethan's face was flushed with excitement, his expression so filled with joy that he couldn't stop smiling. For the second time, he became a father. "She looks just like you," he murmured, unable to take his eyes off our newborn. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow on the blankets. As he held our daughter in his arms and gently showed her to me, my gaze fell on the small red birthmark on her back. I froze. For a brief moment, my mind drifted elsewhere. That same red mark, in the exact same place. My son in my past life had one just like it. Reaching out, I lightly brushed my fingers over her tiny cheek. The baby shifted slightly in my direction, her tiny fingers instinctively wrapping around mine. She gave a soft, gentle tug. My throat tightened. I lowered my head, whispering softly, "Did you choose me to be your mother again?" A single tear slipped down my cheek, landing near her tiny hand. Ethan panicked. Immediately he fumbled to wipe the tears from my face, his voice filled with concern. "Honey, what's wrong?" I blinked, looking up at the two faces staring at me, one big, one small, both filled with worry. I couldn't help but chuckle. Shaking my head, I reached for our daughter and said, "Let's call her Sui Sui." Ethan didn't even hesitate. Whatever I wanted, he would agree to. "Sui Sui," he repeated, his deep eyes reflecting the redness in mine. "That's perfect. Sui Sui it is. A lifetime of peace and happiness."